Good morning and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Natalie Brand. Well, Election Day is a little more than 1 month away, believe it or not. Ballots will go out in just weeks, and we want to get you up to speed on all the big races of the season. So we're kicking off a mini debate series with the race for Seattle City Attorney. The incumbent, Pete Holmes, is being challenged by former Mayor Murray's public safety advisor, Scott Lindsay. We are joined by both this morning. So thank you first for being here.
Thank you.
We are going to start with what was a big headline earlier this week, a significant cost overrun involving the city attorney's office. Mr. Lindsay has said it raises troubling questions. City Attorney Holmes, you have said that you don't have control over the number of lawsuits filed in any given year. So I want to give you each a chance to make your case, starting with City Attorney Holmes.
Sure. Thank you, Natalie. I appreciate the opportunity. I think it is important that people understand that the Judgment Claims Fund number itself is at best an educated guess, not by my office, but by the budget office, based on some past experience. It is extremely volatile, and aside from the first missed projection, missed guess, if you will, that appears to be coming this year, over the last 8 years of my term, we've had more than a $35 million surplus. If you add up the last 10 years, 8 of those are mine. So you could say that we're still in a surplus. But the main thing about it is, I think that the voters do need to understand that if you have questions about the management of the office, my record speaks for itself, my career, half of my life in the legal profession. And I think that if Mr. Lindsay wants to see what management issues are raised by that, he should also start with explaining how he's qualified to describe how to run a law office and describe your experiences, like mine, in every court of this state, from the trial level to the Washington Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court, representing clients.
So I worked for many years in a private law firm. I know how much private law firms charge. I know how to manage litigation cases. And what I've seen from the city attorney's office under Mr. Holmes is actually significant mismanagement of many of these cases and mismanagement of the outside counsel costs. Now, there are some cases where it's important to have city attorneys, assistant city attorneys work those cases. Other cases, it's important to hire outside counsel. When you're doing that, you manage the costs, you manage the outcomes. We are losing more cases, we are losing significant cases, and some of these costs are upwards of $820 per hour per Seattle attorney. That's outrageous. I was a Seattle attorney. I worked at a big law firm. I know we should never be spending that kind of money on outside counsel.
You've questioned whether it's ethical for the city attorney to award contracts to outside law firms whose partners and employees may have donated to a campaign, Mr. Holmes' campaign in this case. Both of you have attorneys or no attorneys and have supporters working for big national and local firms. So should you be elected, would you pledge not to award any contracts to firms whose attorneys have donated to your campaign?
Yeah, let me make this pledge right here. I will not take money from attorneys who are actively working on cases for the city attorney's office. Just this month, Mr. Holmes has taken donations from a law firm that he had hosts that hosted in a fundraiser for him. That same law firm received contracts within 2 days of him holding that fundraiser at the firm. Savit Bruce Willie.
I want to give you a chance to respond.
Sure. You know, this is truly a red herring because these are all completely disclosed contributions, and frankly, a city attorney race, like a judge race, absent contributions from the legal community, contributions that they make based on their assessments of your qualifications for the office, you could not run a campaign. They are all fully disclosed, and the fact that you would think that a $250 donation would entitle you to a large city contract says more about Mr. Lindsay than it does me. Those lawyers have donated money to me as they have in past campaigns, as they have done for every candidate in every past campaign. And I think that the employers for your donors need to know, if you really are saying they're not going to have contracts. I mean, K&L Gates, your former employer, is one of the largest recipients. And, you know, Scott, if giving donations to me, earns contracts, you would think that the reverse would be true. Those huge contracts from the firms that have donated to you at, I might add, twice the rate, $500 a clip. I've agreed through democracy vouchers to keep money out of politics, and that's the irony of all this. I can only raise them at $250 a pop.
Before we have to wrap up this segment, I do want to get to one final question, so answer quickly if you can. In your view, what is the single biggest job or responsibility of the city attorney's office?
Oh, you bet. You know, again, that experience is what I bring to bear. You're the chief legal officer for the city of Seattle. You're the chief misdemeanor prosecutor for the city of Seattle. You lead an office of 102 lawyers and about 90 legal professionals. They look up to me for leadership, for guidance, and I haven't asked them to do anything that I myself haven't done. It's very, very important that you have not only the trust to exhibit leadership in the office, but also with the clients, the many varied clients throughout the city.
Yeah, the first and foremost responsibility of the city attorney's office is public safety, right? This is the chief prosecutor for all misdemeanor crimes in the city of Seattle. That's 80% of the crimes. Seattle is struggling right now with a huge property crime problem and significant challenges in all of our neighborhoods. We need to address that, and the city attorney's office should be at the center of that with smart, innovative strategies that transform our criminal justice system and help break the streets to jail cycle.
So picking this conversation back up, Mr. Lindsay, you've said the city's attorney's office has not done enough to address addiction and homelessness, public safety. Is that the responsibility of the city attorney's office?
Yeah, Natalie, you know, the great majority of repeat offenders who are already being prosecuted by the city attorney's office, who are already in our criminal justice system for crimes like car prowl, for criminal trespass, for shoplift, they are struggling with addiction. In fact, King County led a study that said 88% of our repeat offenders are struggling with addiction, and a significant percentage of them are also struggling with homelessness. So the big question is, for the city attorney's office, and what my plan focuses on, is how do we break that cycle? How do we get folks who have behavioral health challenges, who are already in the criminal justice system, how do we get them out? So if we can do that, that's the magic formula, and that's why we focus on diversion programs, on treatment programs, on social services. We need to integrate those public health solutions into our criminal justice system, which is not working right now.
This is exactly the program that we have in this office and have had ever since I took office. And in fact, I helped wean the city, if you will, from the addiction of using a law enforcement response first. When in my first term there was a demand that I issue 28 warrants for civil incivility downtown by a number of repeat offenders, the very type that Scott is describing. I refused to do so, precisely because there had been no effort made to understand what the underlying causes were. They were essentially criminalizing poverty. They were criminalizing mental illness. They were criminalizing addiction. And in my office, we drew a line. But at the same time, we're not the executive. We don't have those resources. You have been the mayor's point guy, and the executive is where those programs have to be funded and executed. And Scott, you simply haven't had a very good track record. Leaving the executive, coming to my office, is not going to give you any better handle than I am already lending toward the problem.
And so I just strongly disagree. So I helped create the Heroin and Opiate Addiction Task Force. I served on that. I understand the heroin epidemic. I created and led the navigation team working to pair police officers and outreach workers to help get people out of homelessness. But what we experienced is that so many of those folks are already in the criminal justice system. They're already being prosecuted right now by the city attorney's office for crimes like car prowl. So the question is, how do we get them not to go back and commit that crime once again? Right now we have a revolving door. It's failing the defendants who are going through that system, and it's failing our neighborhoods, our communities that are struggling with a wave of property crime in this city. 35,000 or more car prowls in the city of Seattle. What is the city attorney's office going to do to take that on? If I'm city attorney, that's what I'll do.
So somewhat
There's
related.
still no specific plan there, Natalie. And again, we should look to the stats from SPD itself about crime. Now, of course, a victim of crime, it's going to be scant solace to know that, you know, in all, according to Chief O'Toole, crime in this city, despite an amazing increase in population, is actually holding level or dropping off. And yes, there is a role for the prosecutor. This prosecutor has done the job of making sure that we don't fall back into that old tried and failed system of law enforcement first. There's, you know, the problem is there's a bit of a chameleon-like character to your arguments. You know, depending on the group you speak to, you have criticized me for not having enough people charged. You openly criticized Dan Satterberg, the county prosecutor, for not prosecuting those arrested of drug crimes in the 9.5 block project.
Yeah, Mr. Holmes,
so
my criticism of you is that we need to be action-oriented. We need we need to solve these challenges. We have a car prowl problem on the streets of Seattle right now. So the question is, what leadership has your office presented to actually help solve that? What I see is that over half of the cases that SPD sends to your office are actually being rejected, are actually being declined. That includes 65% of all domestic violence cases. That's a systems problem. That's a failure. And we, our city, and our city attorney should be front and center tackling those issues.
Your city attorney is front and center. And in fact, our experience, despite cherry picking statistics and using them out of context, does not reflect the amazing progress that we've made, for instance, in domestic violence. Our filing rate where you have an uncooperative witness is up 30%. Our success rate at trials is up 25%. And those same domestic violence prosecutors have also helped to launch the first ever in the world system for retrieving guns from batterers. That's what my office has done. And these kinds of comments, you know, really just do a disservice to my domestic violence unit, which is, you know, just a dedicated team of professionals, and they're doing that work every day.
So somewhat related question to wrap up this debate. When it comes to policy making at the city level, what do you view the role in creating new laws or ordinances? Mr. Holmes, you've said that the city attorney should stay in kind of a separate lane.
Oh, we certainly advise on drafting of laws, on policy. I certainly speak out on criminal justice policies, on police reform policies, on drug reform policies. I have been a national leader on those fronts. In fact, I have spoken in Europe about legalization, and that's just one example. The failed war on drugs is what I'm desperately afraid is going to hit the city again with these kinds of discussions where people, you know, playing to people's fears, playing to irritation about seeing encampments and the like, rather than focusing on the individuals, the human beings there.
But aside from council, do you think that the city attorney's office should have a more active role in crafting policy?
I was a primary sponsor of I-502. I helped draft ordinances, and you know, a perfect example is the car camping ordinance. Again, another program that failed under your leadership, your claimed leadership on that, Scott. You know, we've got to be able to do something other than simply tow them away. That's what your supporters want you to do. Just tow these cars away and ignore the human beings that live inside. At least Councilmember O'Brien was taking a stab at it where the executive had really fallen short.
We need an activist city attorney who is engaged front and center with the challenges of the city of Seattle, including our criminal justice challenges, our homelessness challenges, and our heroin addiction challenges. These issues affect the city deeply, and they are impacted and managed by the city attorney's office in the sense that the city attorney is responsible for helping to manage how we enforce the laws that are on our books. The city attorney can do much more, I believe, to be front and center in these debates, be a leader, and that's the kind of leader that I want to be if I'm elected.
Last Friday, I intervened in the I-72 27 lawsuit, about supervised injection centers. That's leadership. Yesterday, along with Attorney General Bob Ferguson, I filed a lawsuit on behalf of the City of Seattle to try and recover from the opioid manufacturers the sums of their profits that have really contributed to the suffering and misery that's going on in the streets of Seattle. That's leadership. And you know, it's difficult beyond just the general platitudes to express, to discern a real action program there. Yeah. We are the ones that have to deal with the 14,000 SPD arrest reports that we will receive this year alone, and we're doing a very good job of that.
And Natalie, I called for Mr. Holmes to intervene in I-27 a month ago, and let me say this, right? I was the one who worked to create the Heroin and Opiate Addiction Task Force. I was the one to work to cite supervised consumption sites. I've been shepherding that. That's leadership. Coming in very late in the game after a private lawsuit has already been filed, I don't think that actually qualifies as leadership. In fact, the city of Everett sued the OxyContin makers before the city of Seattle did. That's not right. We have a city attorney that needs to be front and center, and again, that's the kind of city attorney I want to be.
I guess you'd criticize Bob Ferguson for letting Ohio go first, or some other states too, but you know, the important thing is that good, experienced lawyers make sure that they have good cases to bring, that they understand their damages. And my question remains unanswered. Have you ever personally represented a client in any Washington court?
Absolutely, I have. In the Federal District, Western District of Washington.
You were counsel of record?
I was counsel of record.
In a case?
Mr. Holmes, I have been an attorney in private practice for 9 years. I was senior counsel to the House Oversight Committee Democrats in cases that were on the front page of the New York Times and Washington Post every day. And I was front and center in all of the major policy debates of the most controversial issues here in the city of Seattle for the last 3 years as public safety advisor to the mayor. Your criticism that your experience, you have all the experience? Well, your experience got us a $13 million deficit. Your experience means that we have skyrocketing car prowl. Your experience means that public safety communities like Chinatown International District are struggling and they're not getting the help they need. I don't think experience right now, the status quo, is what people are actually after.
You know, that's an interesting take, Scott, because you need to reflect on the fact that throughout your term in the mayor's office, and again, the question still remains unanswered. I'd like to know a single
Genius v. Tech Plot. Look it up. Counsel of record. You asked for a single case. I'm giving you one.
So
Genius v. Tech Plot.
What Scott is asking the people of Seattle is to let them be the city, make the city of Seattle his second client in a Washington court.
You asked for one case. I gave you one case.
Are there more?
Of course.
How many more?
Mr. Holmes, the issue here is not who's the trial attorney.
Yes, it is. The issue is experience, Scott, and I'm afraid because you're going to have to lead an office of 102 lawyers. If those lawyers, most of them have more experience than you, how are you going to inspire their leadership? How are you going to help craft litigation policy, those kinds of strategies?
I think my policy chops have earned me the endorsement of the Seattle Times. They've earned me the endorsement of the Seattle Firefighters Union. They've earned me the endorsement of all 5 leaders of the Community Police Commission. I think I've got the chops to get the job done, and I think the city is asking for new leadership, new ideas, a vision for the future, not talking about what happened 8 years ago.
And as we wrap this up, I'm going to give you a final response, and then we know that this debate will continue.
Thanks, Natalie. I appreciate the opportunity. You know, it's really interesting at this point in time. I'm in my 2nd term, and before the end of the 2nd term, I will be on my 5th mayor. This has been a challenging time for the city and for the nation. We know that the last election was a shock to all of us. And it's very easy when you're in a dynamic situation like that to sit back and pick out and fly back and second guess. You know, the nature of government is an evolving process. Mayor Murray himself said that the homeless cleanups that Scott pinpointed, that was spearheading, they were making it up as they go along. And he never heard me criticize him throughout that, not publicly. What I had to do, though, for instance, was to rein back his use of prison labor in those cleanups and things like that contributed to lawsuits to stop the efforts. I have to staff those. I don't have the option of not defending those lawsuits. And that's the problem. When you're going to use maturity and judgment. You try to help your government move forward. You don't take pot shots just to get a job beyond a patronage position and convince people with a few statistics that something is wrong.
Final word, and then we'll wrap this up.
Yeah. You know, Mr. Holmes has been in office for 8 years, right? He is the status quo. I think the status quo isn't working. Seattle is struggling with real public safety issues. We are 10 years behind in major criminal justice reform. And very clearly, office management of the city attorney's office, of their budget, of litigation cases, and of outside counsel costs is not working. I want to shake all that.
Element. My budget.
This is my closing, Mr. Holmes. This is my closing.
You can't say in your closing, I exceeded my budget. I have not exceeded my budget. Yeah. The Judgment Claims Fund is not part of my budget.
So the budget director, Ben Noble, said that this was the single biggest challenge he faced in crafting a budget this year, and that it was the outside counsel costs were so concerning that it needs to be investigated. That speaks for itself. Much more needs to be done here, but I think the status quo needs to be disrupted, and that's why I'm challenging Pete Holmes. That's why I want to be the next city attorney.
The budget director guessed wrong. That's the best thing that I can say. It was not my office. The budget director is perhaps trying to explain his mistake, but we don't have the option of ignoring lawsuits. And we do the most amazing combination of pro bono litigation, of contingent fee litigation. The opioid case filed just yesterday is a contingent fee case. And we do blended and caps. We work with outside counsel teamed up with our internal counsel. We do an amazing job. And looking at one number where the budget director, one number in my entire term, missed his guess is simply not a case to put you in charge of the law department.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I really appreciate your time today. This was an in-depth debate and weeks more of campaigning ahead of, again, November 7th, the big day.
Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.
Natalie.